Hello and welcome. I am Cyril Stober. Now, the history of ancient civilization tells us about the earliest forms of writing, agriculture, urbanization, organized religion, and government. Now, one country has been known as the cradle of civilization. It has a transcontinental location, Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, and North African, often referred to as the land of the pharaohs and pyramids. It is officially known as the Arab Republic of Egypt. With its National Day being marked on the 23rd of July, we examine Nigeria's relations with this nation that is one of Africa's largest economies, actually the third largest. My guest today is the Ambassador of Egypt to Nigeria, His Excellency Ihab Moustafa Awad. The Ambassador Moustafa Awad is a seasoned diplomat, having served as Deputy Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs, Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, and numerous other positions. Among them, diplomatic postings in New Delhi, India, the United Nations, New York, where he was part of the multilateral negotiations leading to the establishment of the then UN peace-building architecture, and on the reform of UN peacekeeping operations. He has been Egypt's ambassador to Nigeria since December 2020. Let's welcome His Excellency Ambassador Awad Moustafa. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for offering me this opportunity.
Right, I know when generally we talk about Egypt in Nigeria, the first thing that will come to mind among so many people would be, yes, Egypt and Nigeria, they share quite a lot. Particularly in sport. Both countries are powerhouses in football, and images of Mohamed Salah would come into mind. But there are so many other relations, so many affinities, which Nigeria shares with Egypt. We talked about the economies. Egypt has about the third largest economy in Africa, while Nigeria's is the largest in Africa. So let's begin on the premise of seeing how close have Egypt and Nigeria been over the years?
Very close indeed. The relations between the two countries, they go back for a long time. It's a long-standing relations that even extends before the two countries gained independence. However, we would like really to focus on how the countries came together post-independence and how they jointly led and coordinated the struggle in Africa for decolonization and independence, including the establishment of the Organization of African Unity. President Nasser, for example, was one of the very early African leaders to pay Nigeria a visit very soon after its independence. A very famous visit that took him not only to Lagos at that time, but also to Kano, in order to ascertain the fact that Egypt is in support of the unified, independent Nigeria. And from that day on, the two countries really developed a very close relationship, both as two powerhouses in Africa, whose coordinations and relations do not necessarily only, or is not confined to to their own bilateral relations, but what they can do together will affect the entire continent. And that's the premise upon which the relations have developed over the years until today, which now is taking a new shape that is adapted to the new challenges facing them and facing the African continent, not least COVID-19 and its response, not least the current crisis between Ukraine and the Russian Federation and its impact on the continent, and not least how they both coordinate and organize themselves to feature in the next conference, United Nations Conference on State Parties to the Climate Change Convention, which Egypt is going to host in Sharm el-Sheikh in November 2022.
All right. So it's been a long relationship, and we can assume that this relationship has been mutually beneficial to both countries, and we can also assume that in the area of trade, it would have started at a small level, but now we would have some considerable amount of volume of trade between both countries. And how would you assess that?
I must say that both countries have attempted to diversify and deepen their trade relations over the years. But I must also say, and our brothers in Nigeria in government, but also in the private sector, would agree that the level of bilateral trade as it currently stands is way below the potentials of the two countries and what their economies have to offer in terms of trade and the level of trade. Currently we stand at around 165 million US dollars, which the two countries consider to be far below what the potential really are. However, the two countries played a major role in bringing the new African Free Trade Agreement to fruition. And now, of course, they are working together in order to capitalize on what this continental trade agreement can offer. Nigeria is a powerhouse and it's a major pillar of trade and economy in West Africa. Egypt plays a very important role as a bridge within North Africa to the Horn of Africa, but also between Africa and Europe. So there is a lot of potential that the trade relations between the two countries can benefit not only their bilateral economies, but also will have a major effect on taking forward and advancing the Continental Free Trade Agreement. And this is where we are today, and we are working very hard jointly to for this particular objective to materialize in the very near future.
Well, in your opening comments, you talked about both countries being involved in diversification of the economies. Now, of course, Nigeria is working on that, saying that for many years its economy was basically dependent on revenues from oil. Egypt has also done a lot in terms of diversifying its economy. So give us an insight into how Egypt has done in moving forward in the effort to diversify its economy.
Well, the basic pillar of Egyptian economies historically was farming and agriculture. And from the 1950s, 60s and 70s and throughout the 80s and the 90s, there has been a lot of effort exerted by successive governments to enter into developing its industrial sector. And there has been, Egypt recorded a fair degree of success in this particular area, especially in consumer products but also in heavy industries such as steel and iron, petrochemicals, for example. So the Egyptian economy has moved gradually from being predominantly rural and agricultural based to industrial based. But Egypt is very well known for its service sector as well. Tourism, the management of the Suez Canal, and most recently also there has been effort to present it as one of the North Africa's and Middle East's financial centers. In the future also holds for Egypt to become a hub for energy production, and especially when it comes to natural gas. So this is from the Egyptian side, and I think there is a lot for the two countries, Egypt and Nigeria, that they can do jointly in order to mutually benefit from what their economies has to offer to the other. And in terms of agriculture, for example, I think there is a big potential for collaboration between Egypt and Nigeria, not least in connection with how the most recent crisis has revealed the need for these two big economies in Africa and with the entire continent to reach self-sufficiency or near self-sufficiency from essential foods, grains, and their own food production for their food security. So despite the fact that the two countries maybe have moved towards industrialization and diversification in that direction, I think the future holds a lot for the potential collaboration on agriculture, and especially with food security and the nexus between climate, food, water, and energy security. That nexus is, I think, what the future holds for the two countries to work on.
It's interesting because, especially to speak of agriculture being the mainstay, easily if you look at Nigeria's history too, agriculture was the mainstay of its economy. That was before oil was discovered and the shift. Now, just like Egypt, there is a deliberate attempt to go back to agriculture, although this time moving away from the subsistence level, making agriculture a business. But interestingly, you mentioned that Egypt is working towards being made an energy hub in Africa, and being Egypt's ambassador to Nigeria, I would have noticed that that is one area Nigeria has huge challenges. Talking about energy, we know that Egypt has made giant strides in providing energy, working towards self-sufficiency in energy. And many people would like to know, how did Egypt do it? We understand that as much as 20,000 megawatts has been put into the general system within a short period. What are the lessons here we can learn from this?
This is precisely an area that holds huge potentials for the collaboration and the mutual benefit of the two countries. And since I arrived here, this is one of the areas that I learned that President Buhari and President al-Sisi have discussed in their numerous meetings, whether most recent visit by His Excellency President Buhari to Egypt in December 2019, or before that, and even the meetings between the two presidents in the margins of several African summits and other international occasions. This is an area where, upon my arrival here, I have given it, upon the instructions of President al-Sisi, priority. That's our understanding from how President Buhari has presented the issue and the challenge to His Excellency President al-Sisi. And we have carved the framework for the cooperation between the two countries in this particular area through a draft memorandum of understanding, which was presented to the Nigerian Ministry of Power early on. And we're currently looking at the potentials of finalizing that agreement and identifying an occasion to sign it, because that will be one of the major developments in the relationship, the economic relationship, but also the strategic partnership between the two countries. Energy is the engine for economic growth and economic development. And the potential that Nigeria has to grow based on reinventing its own energy production and distribution cannot be underestimated. And Egypt has made some strides, as you rightly mentioned, on this particular path. And that's why this particular area holds a lot of promise for the collaboration between the two countries. We are happy to offer and to extend all of our experience, maybe the good ones and even the less successful ones, so that is the essence of lessons sharing between the two countries. And this is an area that is of great priority for the two countries nowadays.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now let's talk about how both countries approach the matter of education, for instance, which is key. The world has changed so far. And what do you see in terms of education between Egypt and Nigeria?
The area of education has been, as you aware, one of the big challenges for developing countries in general. This is where many of our countries have struggled in order to adapt and to catch up with the huge technological advancement and the advancement in science and technology generally. In recent years, this is an area that has been identified as a key priority for the Egyptian government. But this is also an area where progress and achievements and accomplishments are probably slower than other areas of the economy, because it is a system that is being regenerated. It requires not only the physical structure of schools, it requires the software of that physical structure in the form of teachers. Right. And it requires a whole system from the student to the parent, to the teacher, to the government, to even the private sector nowadays. So it is a bit of a challenge, but it is a challenge that all countries, including Nigeria and Egypt, must have to embrace and face. And the two countries are really taking that seriously. And most recently, we had a meeting in Cairo in the form of our regular political consultations. And education came up as an area that needs to become on top of the priority areas for collaboration.
Interesting you say that this is a huge challenge, because if we go back to history and recall that, just like we said in the introduction here, recall that with ancient civilizations, Egypt was perhaps one of the countries that had an early start, the advantage of having education, the early forms of developing, early forms of writing, and things like that. So generally it would seem, oh, you had a head start. So if you still find it challenging to move from the ancient developments to what's more modern now, then you could see the amount of work that other African countries and particularly developing countries need to go through.
One of the areas that has presented that challenge is that the population grew at a much faster rate than the education infrastructure would have allowed to absorb all the children and all the youth force that was in need and demanded education. So education is very much linked to the general socio-economic development challenges that developing countries have faced and are still facing. You need more schools, you need more teachers, you need more capacity to absorb the students and the children force or the demands for education, and that has not necessarily kept pace with population growth. I believe that this is one of the areas also where Nigeria and Egypt share similar challenges: population growth and the capacity of the education infrastructure to absorb all those who are entitled to fair education and to quality education.
One of the things that Egypt is also known for is tourism. And of course, you want to look back and think of all the exotic sites that people would love to trip to Egypt to see. And again, going back to the ancient civilizations, the pyramids, and all those. And how is Egypt using this to its advantage in the world of tourism and contributing to its economy?
Tourism is a key pillar and has been a key pillar of the Egyptian economy for decades now, or maybe more than decades. However, tourism also is an industry that is advancing, it's developing. There is a lot of competition nowadays on tourism and tourists in the world. What Egypt has to offer is very unique in terms of its vast beaches and coastlines that offers resorts and beach tourism and sea tourism. It has thousands of years of monuments and culture and civilization remnants that present the tourists with a very unique feat, as if you wish. And it has also its very unique Christian Islamic heritage in terms of culture. Most recently, the Egyptian government has realized that these potential need to be presented in new shape. So there has been a very, very, very serious and consistent development of tourist sites, but also of our museums. We are about to inaugurate the largest museum in the world, the Egyptian Grand Museum. And that is something that is going to demonstrate how we evolve into understanding the business of tourism and the value of tourism for cultural exchange, but also for the economy. So there is a very serious and well-studied steps and measures that are taken in order to ensure that tourism sector in Egypt remains the engine of economic growth. However, as you would know also, tourism is linked to the mood in the world. So during the COVID-19 period, for example, it was affected. Currently, also with the current economic downturn globally, it is being affected. So tourism is a gem for the economy, but at the same time, it's a very fragile gem that needs an international and global stability and global atmosphere that can cater to tourism. We have to be mindful of that.
Okay. Well, thank you so very much. At this point, we'll pause a while. When we return, we'll continue this conversation on Nigeria-Egypt relations with Ambassador Moustafa Awad. Stay with us.
Weekend File, your Saturday delight, going to places from the obscure to the hinterland and cities, bringing you development stories and perspectives, connecting the people with government and stakeholders on critical issues of our national life.
We are live in Abuja.
It's 9 p.m. every Saturday on the network service of the NTA. Weekend File, you can't afford to miss it.
Why should we be in a difficult situation financially?
Once upon a time we were rich, but we're not a rich country anymore.
Disaster management is everybody's business.
In all these times, the organization turned to Nigeria.
We would as much want to harness the capacity that is within us so that we see how we can become self-reliant.
1 month ended and you said you are increasing warning strike by 2 months. I mean, you are incubating madness.
Even if these are officials of government who have been told to go and enforce the law and they have gone against the law itself, they must be held accountable.
One-on-One, Friday, 10:30 p.m. on NTA Network. Thanks for staying with us. We still have with us Ambassador Ihab Moustafa Awad, Egypt's ambassador to Nigeria. Well, one other area in which Egypt seems to have made considerable progress is in health. And of course, you'd find that Egypt has been a destination, especially from many developing countries in Africa when it comes to health. So that health tourism, medical tourism is part of what stands Egypt out. Tell us about this development.
Like education, health is a key pillar for any economy and any socio-economic development framework. And successive Egyptian governments, and most recently the current government, has placed a lot of emphasis on developing health for all and stop the trend of health becoming only a business or a facility for only the well-endowed. And there has been 2 major initiatives that stand out in that sense, led by His Excellency President El-Sisi, and under the title 100 Million Health. 100 million is the size of the Egyptian population, and President El-Sisi started with a government-led campaign to vaccinate and to check all Egyptians for virus C infection. Virus C has been one of the major challenges to the general Egyptian health infrastructure. So there has been an investment in free check and free treatment of virus C, and that was done over a period of a few months with mobile campaigns and mobile caravans that toured the entire country in order to do that, and the results were very, very, very encouraging. Similar investment was made in the pharmaceutical industry and the pharmaceutical centers as well, especially for the treatment of diseases like the virus C, for example. Now we have the virus C medication being manufactured in Egypt. The next campaign was targeting women's health, because the health of women, as 50% of our society, cannot be overemphasized in terms of the importance. So the campaign went ahead in that direction as well, very similar to the virus C. So the government has combined investment in health infrastructure in terms of hospitals, in terms of modernizing some of the government hospitals, teaching hospitals, but also in terms of awareness campaigns and outreach to the population. And that has really helped a lot in rejuvenating and reinvigorating the Egyptian health infrastructure. Currently, the government is working on a very ambitious plan for universal health insurance, which is going to cost a lot, but at the same time, it is one element that will complete the picture as to how the government and how Egyptians are seeing health as a key area for investment in the socio-economic development scheme.
Well, Ambassador, both countries, Nigeria and Egypt, strive to move ahead, develop their economies, food security key to all of this, and of course infrastructure. But in today's world, there are huge challenges, and Africa is now seeing part of its share of these troubles around the world. It used to be political instability, but the question of insecurity has now become a major challenge for African countries. Now, how can African countries collaborate in taking on this challenge and surmounting it and guaranteeing security of lives and property? Of course, as you know, Nigeria for some years now has been facing an insurgency, and this has escalated to the question of banditry and kidnapping. Terrorism is on the rise in Africa. These countries are large economies, and the activities of terrorists are slowing them down.
Sir, you touched upon an area of great importance in the current conversation and relations and cooperation between our two countries. It's also an area that has been identified by His Excellency President Buhari during his numerous meetings with His Excellency President El-Sisi as exactly as you described it. It is a menace that is slowing down progress, not only in the two countries, but in the entire continent. You would recall that Egypt has had its fair share of that struggle in from the 80s and 90s, but also more recently after the 2011-2012 periods where the terrorist organizations tried to exploit a brief period of instability in the country. As far as Egypt is concerned, we employed our vast experience in dealing with terrorism from a multidimensional and a comprehensive manner. And insecurity generally, whether it is based on ideological extremism or on banditry and organized crime, there are root causes that has to do with security itself, economic dimensions, social dimensions. So approaching security from a multidimensional point of view is the most effective manner to approach and to defeat terrorism and to defeat crime. Currently, Egypt and Nigeria are working very, very closely in learning from each other the best way to defeat terrorism and extremism. One of which is something that Egypt has to offer, which is through countering the narratives and the ideologies of radicalism and extremism. In our case, for example, Al-Azhar al-Sharif has been in the forefront of countering the narrative of radicalism and extremism. And currently, Al-Azhar has one of the largest missions in the world with Nigeria. Our emissaries, the Al-Azhar emissaries, are embedded in many schools and in many institutions across Nigeria, south and north, with a mission to propagate the better Islamic and religious education in order to counter extremist ideologies or wrong ideas that have penetrated Islamic teachings. So this is one area. And there is also the security to security collaboration. When you look at the map, Nigeria being located in West Africa and from the fringes of the Sahel area, and that Sahel area has its borders bordering very much Libya, Chad, Sudan, and Egypt. So the entire Sahel region is now one unit that whatever happens there affects the national security of both Egypt and Nigeria, maybe in varying degrees, but at the end of the day, the national security now and the security of the Sahel region is indivisible. And it requires collaboration and collective approach among the countries of the Sahel. There is a very serious collaboration going on between our two countries, but also between the countries of the Sahel. Most recently, Egypt has inaugurated the center, the counterterrorism center in the SINSAD organization, which is the Sahel, the larger definition of the Sahel region, which extends from Senegal in the west to Somalia in the east, and that belt. And the center has started working. It is located in Cairo, but there has been continuous collaboration between Egypt, Nigeria, and the countries of the Sahel in order for that center to become the beacon for exchanging experience and also collaborating and coordinating policies and action to defeat terrorism. The same thing can be said about the current collaboration between our security agencies to defeat and to beat organized crimes in general terms, countering drug trafficking, small arms and light weapons, illicit trafficking. So this is really going on, and the two governments take it very, very seriously in their collaboration in the larger scheme of their bilateral relations.
Well, Ambassador, let's turn our attention to the peoples of both countries. Egyptians in Nigeria, Nigerians in Egypt. These are let's say, the people's diplomats themselves, going back and forth, carrying out either trade or their private businesses in both countries. How has it been with the Egyptian community in Nigeria? And of course, you would know of Nigerians who are in Egypt as well.
I was pleasantly surprised when I arrived here to learn that the Egyptian community in Nigeria has been there for a long, long time. There are intermarriages. There have been Egyptians who have been living in Nigeria for a long time, and they have become already part of the society. They have come here maybe a long time ago as either engineers or doctors, 60s and 70s, and they have stayed on and established themselves as Egyptian Nigerians. And they are spread around the country. You find them in the south, and you'll find them in the middle belt, and you'll find them in the north. And they are quite a sizable community here. And this community has really served the purpose of bringing the two people together, because they still very much linked to Egypt, and they have their extended families now in both countries. So they played a major role, both in terms of performing their profession, whether they are teachers, engineers, or doctors, or as citizens, maybe, if you wish, of both countries. The same thing can be said about the Nigerians who have been living in Egypt for a long, long time. And then also there are intermarriages. And you can see, and I've met here Nigerians who have been married in Egypt, and whether their families live with them here or they have been living with their families in Egypt. And maybe this is not one aspect of our historic relationship that has been celebrated enough. But in the most recent developments and I would say the boom in the exchange, the people-to-people exchange between our two countries, whether it is related to tourism, whether it is related to cultural tourism, whether it is related to medical tourism, I think that people-to-people exchange is now flourishing and taking a much deeper shape. And we count very much on the people, as you rightly mentioned, to become the ambassadors and the diplomats that will actually anchor our bilateral relations and move it forward. And also to diversify our businesses. There are businesses of Egypt that has been here for a long time and is flourishing. And there are businesses from Nigeria in Egypt that has been there for a long time and is also flourishing. Most recently, Egypt has become one of several trade hubs that Nigeria has identified in order for its commodities to be launched from there. It's like a launching platform for exports of Nigerian goods to the Arab world and to Europe. And Egypt has become one of these hubs. So really, there is a lot of prospects that this people-to-people exchange will take our relations further.
Let me just, before we begin to wind down, go back to some other interesting aspect of development in both countries. As you're aware, at some point in time, Nigeria moved its capital city from Lagos to Abuja. And Abuja is still being built to be a mega city. We understand that Egypt is developing a new administrative city in Cairo, developing infrastructure for its civil service and its public service. You'd like to tell us a little bit about that?
This is one of the most important mega projects, development projects that the Egyptian government under President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has embarked on in recent years. And probably it is linked to something that we discussed earlier in our conversation in terms of the population growth and the inability of the traditional old urban centers to accommodate and to absorb the increased needs of its population in terms of schools, health, but also in terms of job opportunities. Maybe the most celebrated is the administrative capital, which is now being built because it receives and attracts a lot of light. But it's one of several new cities, new urban centers that is capitalizing on the fact that the old urban centers needs to develop and be expanded in order to accommodate the increasing population, but also in terms of developing our urban centers along the lines of the modern cities of the world. What do we mean by smart cities? Right. What do we mean by the infrastructure that will cater for connectivity, that will cater for the proper schooling that is based on technology and internet and connectivity? The administrative capital is definitely the biggest of these projects, but it's one of many urban centers that is now anchoring the next phase of Egypt's development and economic development. We are inspired by previous experiences, Nigeria's Abuja being one of them. And when I came here to see that Abuja is still developing after so many years, I tried to transform the idea that this would require patience and it will take some time for the new urban centers really to attract businesses, to attract people to live in. And I can see Abuja as a very successful example in that sense, which I hope the administrative capital in Egypt will develop to be the same in the very near future.
Ambassador, as we wind down, let's look at one area where both Egypt and Nigeria well celebrated: sport, particularly football. Both are giants in the world of football, and the exploits of Egyptian professionals are well known to Nigerians, and Nigerians who have attained heights in professional football are also known in Egypt. And as I said at the beginning, Mohamed Salah is easily one of the most known footballers to have come out of the continent and has a huge following in Nigeria. Nigeria's Super Eagles, they have had encounters with the pharaohs of Egypt. I've lost count of who is leading. So how do you look at the relations between these two countries moving forward, identifying things that can further cement their relationships, especially sport as a vehicle for greater relations?
You touched upon a very, very important I would say a treasure in the relationship between our two peoples. As you mentioned, Mohamed Salah, some of the very famous Nigerian footballers of the 90s, the golden era of Nigerian football, were household names in Egypt when I was growing up. I'm a big football fan, and I watched the Nigerian gold medal triumph, for example, in Atlanta, 1996. Right. I watched the World Cup 1994, and names such as Rashidi Yakini, Daniel Amokachi, Emmanuel Emuniki, these are household names. Also, some Nigerian footballers played professional football in Egyptian league, and they still are. Many of them are still playing in Egypt. So yes, sports and especially football is a key unifying aspect. Maybe there is a competition, which is a healthy one, between the two countries, but the players, they play a major role in bringing the two peoples together and closer together. One of the ideas that I suggested when I went to Lagos and we were discussing how to boost Nigerian tourism to Egypt was that perhaps an inaugural launching trip of Nigerian footballers, but also Nigerian pop singers, Nigerian artists can actually lead a delegation on a tourist expedition. And it will be covered by media, covered in newspapers, on websites, and the people to see that the Nigerians are coming to visit, and maybe one of them is Nwankwo Kanu, for example, leading that delegation. That will be very effective, and it will actually mean a lot to the Egyptians, and it will mean a lot to boost people to people and tourist relations. So football and sports, they hold a lot of promise, as well as other areas.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, and as we conclude, you look ahead in the coming years. What do you see regarding Nigeria and Egypt?
I am very optimistic, and I become optimistic by the day as the days pass for me here as an ambassador of Egypt to Nigeria. The potentials of both countries are very, very clear. The potentials of both countries as two of the biggest economies in Africa, and what happened between them will matter for the continent, is something that I think both governments and both peoples do realize. So I believe that we have to show the way on maybe pilot areas. Many of them we discussed today. Energy is one. If we manage really to get a very good and meaningful collaboration and exchange on energy, for example, that is going to be something that we can actually help catalyze energy production and energy development in the continent. Agriculture and food security is another area that the two countries can show the way. I think there are areas for the two countries to benefit on a bilateral basis, but more importantly, to show the way for the continent how it is possible for the two big giants of Africa to catalyze bigger Africa's transformation for the future. This is how I see it, and I'm very glad that many also in Nigeria see it the same way, and that's why I'm optimistic, as I mentioned.
Excellency, Ambassador Ihab Moustafa Awad, Ambassador to Nigeria, Egyptian Ambassador to Nigeria. It's been interesting talking to you, and we hope we can explore further other relations, particularly in media with Egypt, between Nigeria and Egypt. We'd like to thank you for coming on One on One, and we hope to see you again on one of our other platforms. Thank you very much for coming.
I thank you for the conversation, and I highly appreciate it.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, that's our program today. We thank you for watching. Next week, we'll be back with One on One. I'm Cyril Stover saying, continue to stay safe.